Hi everyone, I'm Tally, this is Farrell and we are bored of it, and welcome to our buyer's guide for Wingspan, a game about attracting a beautiful and diverse collection of birds to your nature reserve. Wingspan is for 1 to 5 players, or it goes up to 7 with the Asia expansion. Insanely popular, Wingspan has been one of the best-selling and most recognisable board games of the last few years, based on a core of hand management, engine building and action selection.
So if you're new to our buyer's guides, let's just take you through what's going to happen. So we cover it in a factual manner. We go through kind of what you need to know to make an informed decision if you're looking at getting an expansion or the base game or kind of accessories, whatever you're into. And so we're going to go through kind of what Wingspan is, the history of it, what content is available for it, how all that content combines together, how you can use it, what you can swap in and out. We're going to kind of talk about all the accessories that are available, and then finally we're going to cover what we think and what you need to know before buying. So this will be timestamped if you want to jump to maybe a specific expansion or if you just want to know our thoughts. And please note before we begin that we received the Wingspan Asia expansion for review, the fan art pack for review, and we bought the nesting box ourselves, but we had a discount on it. Everything else we bought ourselves. So with that, we will get into the buyer's guide, but if you find it helpful, please consider subscribing because it would really help us grow the channel and make more of these. Wingspan was released in 2019 by publisher Stonemaier Games. It was designed by Elizabeth Hargrave with art from Ana Maria Martinez Jaramillo, Natalia Rojas, Greg May, Beth Sobel, and it's themed around attracting North American birds into a wildlife reserve. It was an instant hit and everywhere due to the fact it has accessible gameplay, vibrant artwork, it's engaging to play, and it had such a novel theme for the time. Also, the excellent components, like the fact that it has a giant dice tower shaped like a bird feeder or wonderfully tactile multicolored eggs, didn't hurt either. It was and is everywhere, including TV, and this popularity is attested by the fact that it is currently ranked, at time of writing, the 25th best board game of all time on BGG.
Wingspan takes place over 4 rounds, with a variable number of actions each round. Players will begin by being dealt a randomised hand of bird cards, and they'll need to draft 5 items from these cards and also food resources. Players will take it in turns to take one of 4 actions, which will be denoted by placing an action cube on the action on their player map, and they'll go until they've run out of action cubes. At the end of each round, players will score themselves against an end of round goal, ranking themselves from best to worst, and they have to give up an action cube in the process. The 4 possible actions are as follows. Players can play a bird from their hand by placing it on their player mat and adding it to any habitat it can reside in. This action costs food resources as denoted on each bird, and also potentially eggs. The gain food action allows the player to take a variable number of dice from the bird feeder and gain the food resources as printed on the dice. The lay eggs action allows a player to place a variable number of eggs on any birds that they like, as long as those birds can hold eggs and have space in their nest. And the gain birds action allows the player to gain a variable number of bird cards. All actions, with the exception of play a bird, will grow in power the more bird cards you have played to the relevant row, allowing you to gain more and more. When you take an action, you'll always get what's printed on the leftmost unoccupied space in the row, with many spaces allowing you to do a small boost to the action at the cost of some other type of resource. However, there is one final twist, and that is that the bird cards themselves have special powers which activate at different times. Some have no powers at all, some activate when played, some activate when other players take certain actions, and some activate at the end of the round. However, it should be noted that some of these are only available with the expansions. The most common type of card are the bird cards with brown powers, and they will activate when you take the action of the row where they are placed. For instance, if you take the gain birds action, you'll draw a number of bird cards up to what you are allowed, and then move one by one left down the line, activating all of those bird cards with brown powers. This is where the engine building comes in, because you'll be creating powerful chains of effects in order to churn out points. And speaking of, after the 4th round, it's time to score up. And players will score 1 point per egg laid on their birds. They'll score 1 point per cached food on their birds and 1 point per tucked bird card under their birds. Players will also score for points that are printed on each bird card that's played to their habitats. They'll score for the end of round goals, and they'll also score for any completed bonus cards. And they are basically personal objectives and might be something like have a certain amount of birds with colours in their name. And then, surprisingly, the player with the most points will be the winner.
We've already covered the base game, so we'll move straight on to the expansions. The first expansion was Wingspan, the European expansion, which followed in the same year, 2019, and of course features European birds. And this was driven by the fact that when the original Wingspan came out, every European complained there was no European birds. So this is an expansion that gives you more of everything, and that's about it. You get more bird cards, all European of course, you get more goal cards, more bonus cards, more end of round goals, you get different coloured eggs. It basically just gives you more of everything. So it's a nice little one to pick up if you want that variety and to expand the base game a little bit. And small box, cheap price. Coming in 2020 was the Wingspan Oceania Expansion. And this was more about adjusting perceived flaws in the base game of Wingspan. So here, the gameplay content is kind of correcting things or altering things to the core gameplay. So, for example, a common complaint was that it could be arbitrarily difficult for one player compared to another player in terms of what food they can get, because you are just rolling dice and the dice determine what food you can get. So here, there is now new dice which go in the bird feeder, and it contains a new food resource called nectar, which is wild food, essentially. Then you also have redesigned player mats, because there was a complaint that the laying eggs action was too powerful late game if you'd built up that row, because eggs are worth points and you could just keep doing it in the final round. And if you had a good engine, you'd get points for the eggs and points for everything else. So now the actions are rebalanced in terms of what you get, and it's tightened up a bit to kind of combat that. You also get all your usual stuff, so you get your Oceania birds, you get new goal tiles, and you get new bonus cards. And I have to say that actually the end of round end of round goal tiles in this expansion are probably my favorite in all of Wingspan content. 2022 saw the release of Wingspan Asia, which is a really interesting thing in the Wingspan lineup, because it's both an expansion to the base game of Wingspan, but it's also a standalone game for 1 to 2 players. It comes with all the components needed for a 1 to 2 player game of Wingspan, although if you only buy this and don't own the base game, you'll have to play the new duet mode. Or, because it has these components, you can add it to base Wingspan and have an up to 7 player game of Wingspan with the new flock mode introduced in this expansion. You also get all your standard stuff, your new birds from Asia, you get a new color of eggs, you get some new bonus cards, but here you don't get any more end of round kind of goals, because you only get duet end of round goals. So the way duet works is, rather than have the end of round goals, you now have new ones for kind of 2-player duet mode. And the main focus of duet mode is a little mini-map shared by the 2 players, where they're fighting over space, because every time one of you plays a bird, you get a duet token and you place it on that mini-map, matching a kind of aspect of the bird you played. Maybe the habitat it's in, maybe the food cost. And you're fighting over space, and you're fighting to kind of make chains and meet these end of round goals, and you'll get some extra points for how well you kind of do those at the end of the game. Moving into accessory territory, there are all kinds of things available for Wingspan. One of the most new and prominent things is the Wingspan fan art pack, which we recently did a little review of, if you want to check that out. But essentially what this is it gives you 255 Wingspan cards from the base game and pretty much all the expansions so far. And it just has fan art renderings of them. So there was competition, people submitted their artwork, and they've now printed them on the cards. So they're functionally identical to the ones that you get, but they just have all kinds of cool styles and artworks across a whole range of ages. It's just a really kind of fun, neat little expansion we had a lot of fun with, kind of looking at. And it's also a really great way if you maybe just have base Wingspan and you don't want to get all the other expansions and you just want a cheap way to get a lot of cards. This is how you do it. On top of that, there are kind of different types of eggs you can buy, speckled eggs and golden eggs that are available from Stonemaier. There's rubber playmats. There's also vision-friendly cards, which they basically really help with the readability of the cards. But on top of that, because they're set for each expansion, it's a really great way just to get more bird cards without getting everything else that comes with that expansion. Finally, there is also the nesting box, which is a giant storage solution to contain everything past and future Wingspan. And it's a really terrific storage system, but also very expensive.
Since everything is designed around the Wingspan base game, everything is pretty interchangeable. The only thing to be wary of is the Wingspan Oceania Expansion, which comes with a new type of food resource, which is nectar. Some of the bird cards in this expansion either use nectar as a food cost, or they have some power that's related to nectar. So if you acquire these cards in some other way, perhaps through the fan art expansion, or you just shuffle all of those cards into your main decks, but you're not using Oceania, then you may run into problems. However, there is an argument that if you have that expansion, you should be using it anyway, because it comes with new player mats and also the nectar, which are added in to make the base game more balanced. Other than that, go wild. You don't need to buy the expansions in any particular order, but do note that Wingspan Asia can be played as a standalone game.
We've already mentioned how wildly popular Wingspan is, and it's rated the 25th best board game of all time and all that. But one thing to know is that it isn't universally acclaimed, and in some ways it's quite divisive, because with a lot of, you could say, hardcore gamers and even some very kind of top tier reviewers, they were left pretty meh, pretty uninterested, or found it a little boring, a little kind of unimaginative, if you will. So it's not a game that is for everyone. And I think it is a game that appeals much more to people who are newer to the hobby than to people who are kind of entrenched and know what they like. Now, some of this also comes from the fact that there's two sides to Wingspan. You've got the side that where is very approachable. It's very engaging. It allows you to kind of take simple actions to build up lovely combos and have a really engaging engine that kind of then produces at the end of the game and gives you lots of points and goodies. And that's always very fulfilling and rewarding. It's also something that looks amazing out on the table. It draws people in. It's accessible. But then on the other hand, there are some rough edges, you could say. There's the fact that food and what food you can obtain is kind of down to the roll of the die. And if it doesn't fit what you need in that moment, it's a lot rougher for you and more difficult than it is for your opponent, where the bird feeder gives them exactly what they need. On top of that, there are certain, at least in the base game of Wingspan, as already mentioned, certain ways to play that are much better than others. And also the fact that when it comes to kind of end of round goals or scoring objectives, a lot of time it can really depend on the luck of the draw. Do you get the right birds that fulfill that objective, or do you not? That can really have a big effect on how many points you get. And this is something that obviously people will kind of get annoyed about, or it won't be for them, or they don't want to deal with it. So I wouldn't say this as a rule, but you'll probably like Wingspan a lot more and get more out of it if you prefer to play on the lighter side, if you prefer your games to be a bit simpler, or maybe if you're just kind of newish to the hobby and you're just looking for something at your level. I think if you're a more hardened board gamer, you'll have probably either found your niche already or seen things that you like more or you feel is more polished. But this isn't as a rule, obviously. And I think what you'll tend to find is that Wingspan is always easy to get to the table, no matter if you are a hardened board gamer or if you're new to the hobby, just because it is kind of approachable, accessible, it's relatively simple to play and set up and get on the table. And we're living proof of that because Wingspan is one of our most played games, but it definitely wouldn't be in our top 10, top 20 board games of all time if we're going to make that list. It's just that people know Wingspan. People who don't play board games might recognize it. Probably 99% of board gamers do recognize it. It's even on TV. And that allows it to kind of be something that a lot of people are willing to get on the table and just play, even if it's not their preferred game.
So you may have heard of Wyrmspan and be wondering what it is, as it's labelled on the box as a Wingspan game. We have a full review of Wyrmspan if you want a more in-depth look, but please do note we were provided a review copy by the publisher. Essentially, it's a reworking of Wingspan by another designer, Connie Vogelman, who built upon Elizabeth Hargrave's work. The art is by Clementine Camperdoux. Essentially, the birds are replaced by dragons and some of the key mechanisms are altered. You now have to excavate caves on your player mat in order to be able to play dragons there. The dragon powers have to be activated by an action in and of itself. And to take actions, you have to spend coins, of which you can have a variable amount in your supply. There's also a new track, which gives you resources and scoring opportunities when you move up it. Wyrmspan is a tighter game, more geared towards experienced board gamers. And if you're an expert in Wingspan, it might take you a few games to adapt to how to go about getting what you need. In our opinion, they are two different entities and we're pretty happy to own both. Wyrmspan is probably best if you maybe found Wingspan a little bit too light and you want something that's a bit meaner with more crunch. Or maybe you're just a big fan of Wingspan and you just want something that's Wingspan but different.
So, what do we think? Why is it that we think of Wingspan?
Why is it that we like Wingspan?
Yeah.
We think
what do we think of Wingspan?
What do we think of it? We think that it is a terrific game, basically. It's probably not one of our kind of top 10, top 20 favourite games ever, but it's something that we would never turn a game down of. We have a lot of friends that really like Wingspan. When they come round, if they request to play it, I don't think I would ever say, no, I really can't bother with Wingspan.
No.
I always love to play it. It's more of a relaxing game for us, something to play on the odd occasion with a cup of tea, but solid game.
Yeah, it's such an easy proposition. I think, like you say, we're not crazy about it. I think it's one of those ones we'd probably struggle that one of us would pick to get out unless we had guests. But the thing is, because there's a constant influx of content, you get your expansions that we've covered here, the fan art pack, things like this. We've then taken to getting it out a couple of times. Every time we kind of get one of these new expansions and then playing through it. And then it's just such an easy game to get to the table and you enjoy it and it's not too long to play. So you get a few games in, try everything out. So yeah,
I definitely get a renewed love for it every time we do get a new expansion, and it kind of makes me think, I would like to play it more, but then of course other things just take over. But yeah, never not enjoyed a game really.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to have a place in our collection, even though it's not going to be in our top 20, top 30 or whatever, because it's just, we're just always going to get it to the table, I think. And we know there's more expansions coming in the future.
Yeah.
You got plenty of other continents that have birds, which are not in this game. So moving on to the expansions, pretty much if you're interested in any of them, we recommend them. It's just about how far you want to go, basically. So touched upon already that we'd recommend the European expansion, either if you have a big love for European birds, or if you just want more Wingspan. It just expands the base game. It gives you cards, it gives you kind of all the little bits and pieces. So it's basically just more stuff.
Just inject something fresh so that you can get a little bit more replayability and get a renewed vigor for it, I guess. Obviously, the decks are quite big anyway, but after a certain point, you're going to have seen all the birds, so quite nice to just inject something new and fresh in there. Yeah,
and then what about Oceania?
Oceania is something maybe you want to get if you find that the base game, is maybe a little bit unbalanced. Like some people have complaints about like the eggs being unbalanced. And what this does is introduce a new food source. So like the randomization of the bird feeder as well, and the way that certain food resources will fall. Having the nectar in the game, it acts as a wild, so it kind of mitigates some of that randomness. So that's something maybe to consider if you have like a problem with Wingspan about the balance.
Yeah, it also makes it a bit more interactive because you now have a new scoring condition of the nectar and who has used the most in what areas.
Yeah.
So then it's not direct interaction, but you do want to consider what the other players are doing. So that kind of adds to that. And
I like it.
Yeah, I'll also add that actually my favourite end of round goal tiles come in Oceania, because you have one that's blank. So actually there's nothing that's scored and you keep an extra cube that round, so then you have more actions over the game, which is quite interesting. And then you also have one's personal favorite, and it's like birds with their beak pointing left or birds with their beak pointing right, and those are good fun when you're trying to compete for, kind of scoring objectives. But
we like the expansion, right?
Yeah,
like,
I think
we were playing with it most of the time in the end.
Yeah, I think the only negative is it's kind of a bit of an all or nothing, because you're chucking out some of the original Wingspan content, the player mats and dice, to include it. So it's not one of those expansions that's like very easy to put in and out. It kind of is supposed to replace core content, and you're supposed to move forward with it. So some people probably don't want to take all of that and move forward with it. They'd rather just an easy expansion like the European expansion.
Yeah.
But we like it. I mean, it's good. But I don't know if I'd want it every time. Then come to Wingspan Asia. And I think this is a really great proposition, because if you're kind of like us, a couple, you are only going to play 2-player, like most of the time. It's a really nice little way to get into Wingspan if you don't already have it. If you just kind of want to try Wingspan, then it's also a cheaper way to get into it because it's a standalone game. Or if you have a lot of friends who like Wingspan and you want to play with up to 7 and you have the base game. But it's a bit of a weird one, but it has a lot of different uses, you could say. And of course, as always, you get your birds of the region.
It's a bit more functional in a way, rather than adding like more content. Have to say, I couldn't think of anything worse than a 7-player Wingspan game, personally.
I have to agree.
I think for us, we played 5 once and it was pretty painful, but each to their own.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has some sort of simultaneous play. So it's kind of like a 4 and a 3 or something, or a 3 and a 3. So maybe that speeds it up a little bit. Yeah, it's not ideal when we play that 5-player game. No. So then you just have all the accessories. And I think we're both really enamored with the fan art pack.
Yes, love it.
Yeah.
I think it's such a smart way of adding in new content rather than just making another expansion with like yet more bird cards that might be the same. Having the fan art pack is very novel, very unique. I think super smart. What we found with it is it made it it's something that's very interactive, because the art is so different card to card. And the kind of quotes at the bottom about who created it is just really a fun little touch. And, you know, we were both saying, have a look at this, have a look at this.
Yeah.
And really sharing the cards, which you wouldn't typically do with the other cards. So I think that is a super nice way of doing it. And that was the one that I think most re-enamored me with the game.
Yeah. I think it was, and I also really like it just because if you have base Wingspan and you want to get a bunch of bird cards but none of the other stuff, it's a really easy way to get a huge load of cards from all the expansions. The same kind of in functionality, but obviously different art, and you can do that. Same with the kind of vision-friendly bird card packs, where you can also just buy those. Of course, if you're not getting them specifically for the greater readability, then they are going to look different in some ways than the rest of your cards. So that's kind of up to you. I also think that we really enjoy the nesting box, although it's a very hard proposition to recommend because it's quite expensive for what it is, but it does end up saving a lot of space, especially when there's going to be future expansions and it will hold all of them. I think it increases it kind of makes the setup go much quicker because everything's like nicely organized. You just pop it out and it keeps all the cards together. So this is something that I think we're really glad we have, but you know, I think it's very much almost like flamboyant purchase.
Yeah, it's
like
a bit extra.
It's a bit extra, yeah.
But I like extra things, so that's okay.
And then I guess finally, Wyrmspan is similar but different. I think we really like it. I think mechanically we probably prefer it, but then we do like heavier games. But it is like reasonably different. I'm like, we would keep both.
Yep, definitely.
Some people wouldn't, but check out our review really if you want to know more. So I think that was our buyer's guide for Wingspan. So we hope it was helpful. As always, if there's any questions, just ask us. And please, if it was helpful, consider subscribing, because then it helps us grow the channel, helps us collaborate with publishers, and then that lets us create these kind of heavy work.
Content heavy.
Yeah, content heavy, work heavy videos, basically. So it's a big help to us if you do that. Otherwise, we will see you next time for more of our videos, and thanks for watching.